You need to be married. And so we need to stop pretending like that's a thing. That's not a thing. Your singleness is not a gift. It may be a phase of your life that God's placed you in, a trial, and you need to be faithful to do it well, to play your part well in this time. But it's not a gift, and you shouldn't be looking at it as a place you want to stay. Hello, YouTube and podcast. It's good to have you here. It's me, Larson Hicks, and I am coming to you here in June of 2022. It's good to have you joining us on the show. So today I am going to talk about why I believe young men need to get married early and need to get married even as early as college. So should men get married in college? Larson's answer, yes, they should. And I'll dive into it. So why do I believe this is the case? Well, I mean, there's a lot of... to start with, I would just say, how many of your arguments for why you shouldn't do this are biblical? So let's just start there. Like, biblically speaking, the Proverbs say, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." And it talks about how house and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. So when a man finds a wife, Scripture says he's found a good thing and it's a blessing, and God loves him. So I don't see a lot of. Obviously, that doesn't say that finding a wife early is bad, finding a wife young is bad, or finding a wife when you're old is bad. It's kind of neutral on the age thing. But I would say if you have if the Lord has brought you a woman that you would like to marry and that she would like to marry you, and there is not a good reason not to get married, then you should marry that woman. God is trying to bless you, and you should accept that blessing. So one of the things a resource I'd love to point you to, and I'll put a link to it in the description, but Doug Wilson wrote a great article a number of years ago called 7 Reasons Young Men Should Marry Before Their 23rd Birthday. And it was fantastic. And I've sent that to countless young men and encourage you to go give it a read if you haven't. I'm going to cover a lot of the same material because I think he hits a lot of the high points. I would say, just looking at nature, how did God design us? Young men peak in their in testosterone in their teenage years, in their early 20s, late teens, and so it seems that God has designed young men to want to be married and to want to have a healthy, biblical sexual outlet at that age. I love the 1662 Anglican wedding ceremony wording. I was at a wedding recently that used these words from the Anglican wedding ceremony. I'm going to read through them because I think it's phenomenal. It says, first, talking about wedding, first, marriage, it was ordained for the procreation of children to be brought up in the fear and nurture of the Lord and to the praise of his holy name. So that's the first purpose of marriage. Secondly, it was ordained for a remedy against sin and to avoid fornication, that such persons as have not the gift of continency might marry and keep themselves undefiled members of Christ's body. So that's the second reason for marriage. And thirdly, it was ordained for the mutual society, help, comfort that one ought to have to the other, both in prosperity and adversity, into which holy estate these two persons present come now to be joined. So, beautiful words. You don't get to hear the word fornication in very many wedding ceremonies these days, but it's true, and I think this is part of our problem with marriage is that we've forgotten the purpose of marriage. God saw Adam in the garden. We don't know how much time passed between God putting Adam in the garden and God deciding that he was not good, but it seems at least from the order of the Scripture, it's not like Adam carries on a long life, long fulfilled life before Eve, and then God goes, you know what? I've decided after a long life without Eve that maybe you need a wife. It seems like it's pretty quick. And I think Adam recognizes that himself as well. But so I think the first thing to point out is just that there is a purpose for marriage, and I think we need to ask ourselves before we start telling our kids, you can't get married young, I don't want you to get married young. We need to ask ourselves, well, what is the purpose of marriage? Why does God give a man a wife? What's the point of that? And I think if you start answering that, I think you're going to come up with a similar list here to what the Anglicans have been saying since the 1600s, and I think society has said since time immemorial that marriage is for bringing up children. It's for protection against sin, and it's for mutual help and society and comfort. And so why does a young man in college not need those things? And I would say not need them especially at that time. The crazy thing is that, so we talked about men, their testosterone peaking at those ages. Women, their fertility peaks in their late teens, early 20s, right? So unlike a woman, a man can continue to be fertile into his old age, but women actually can't. Women, there is a steep drop in mid 30s for women in their fertility. There's a lot of women that bear children after that, obviously, but there is a hard deadline. There's a hard end date for fertility for women if you're not using the aid of in vitro and all kinds of crazy scientific stuff that frankly depressingly doesn't really work. There was a gal on the cover of People magazine, I want to say, in the 90s, early 90s, and the gal was a career woman, and it said she was the picture of the modern woman, and she had a bunch of her eggs frozen, so she could put that on ice, literally, raising children, having a family on ice while she pursues her career. And it was hailing her. This is back in the 90s, hailing her as the picture of the modern successful woman. And it's crazy to think how many women saw that and were inspired to follow. There was a follow-up on this lady I just saw this year, the same woman, and it turns out many of the eggs died. They tried. Basically, none of the eggs were viable. If I remember the story correctly, none of the eggs were viable when she came 10 years later, or whenever it was, to actually go try to have a family now. It turns out it didn't work. And so we try to play God, and that's, I think, one of the big problems with the way we think about marriage. We think about marriage and children as I get to play God. We've imbibed so much of the modern sexual revolution, feminist mindset that we don't even notice it. This idea that, well, I'm in control. I plan out every aspect of my life, and I get to pick the number of kids, and the timing of the kids and everything else. And I think there's a lack of faith there. I think there's a real temptation, I think, to find yourself in a ditch. I don't think that people who have one or two kids are wildly more happy or successful than people who have a lot more than that. But I digress, because I'm not talking about the number of kids right now. I'm just talking about having kids. So men are at their peak in their teens, early 20s. Women are also at their peak fertility, teens, 20s. So just naturally, it seems like God's designed this in this way. The crazy thing, I looked at the stats before I got on. I think it was the knot.com. In 2021, the average age of first marriage for women, and actually I should back up because I know that I saw these stats on Doug's blog. He had quoted some of the stats on. I'm pulling it up real quick on the average age of marriage for people. So this is what he put in there. This is from the Atlantic. He said that in 1960 the average was 20 for women and 22 for men. So in 1960, men were getting married at the age of 22, and women were getting married at the age of 20. Okay, so fast forward to 2021, and the stat that I was able to pull from the knot.com is the average age for women now is 33, and the average age for men is 35. So that's a full 13 years later for women from 20, and a full 13 years later for men. So in 40 years we've moved, and it's crazy because there is actually, I mean, I am coming back to the fertility question, but we are seeing. I saw an interview with Elon Musk recently where he was asked, "What's the biggest technological, or what's the biggest problem in the world today that keeps you up at night, that you feel like you don't know how to, that it's impossible to solve?" And he said this. He said population decline is a disaster that's coming, and it's hit. I think I saw in Japan recently, their population dropped from 12 million. It dropped like 600,000 in 1 year or something. It was, or since the last census, maybe it's 10 years, but regardless, it's a huge drop. We've imbibed in this crazy worldview that the world is overpopulated. It's not, and the fallacy is that people are just consumers. They're not. They're producers. And so all of the stuff we have, all of the resources we have, all of the infrastructure we have was created and is maintained by people. And so we don't, a world with fewer people means a world where we can't take care of ourselves. It's just basic math. It's basic, just run this thing out. So how do you maintain the standard of living and the access to things that we have, from a plumber to having the ability to ship products across the country, across the world? That just doesn't exist if in a world that's underpopulated. So I think it's crazy to think that people aren't getting married until basically the very tail end of a woman's fertility. At the very, very end, that's the average age now, 33, and so we're basically saying, there's not really an opportunity for a woman to have more than a baby or two at that point, unless something special happens there. So that's a few obvious points. I know I'm kind of dwelling on that, but I do think it's interesting. The idea of singleness being a gift, biblically speaking, is not a thing. There's a gift of celibacy, not of singleness. I think that's there's been a leap made there by a lot of Christian teachers, like, oh, your singleness is a gift, you should be thankful for it, and all of that. If you don't have the gift of celibacy, if God has made you as a man somebody who desires to be sexually active, who has those desires, if you are tempted by pornography, for example, then you are not somebody who has the gift of celibacy, and therefore shouldn't be single. You should be looking for a biblical outlet for that desire that God's given you. And so you need to be married. And so we need to stop pretending like that's a thing. That's not a thing. Your singleness is not a gift. It may be a phase of your life that God's placed you in, a trial, and you need to be faithful to do it well, to play your part well in this time. But it's not a gift, and you shouldn't be looking at it as a place you want to stay. So kind of like in this the same kind of fallacy. The next one I want to move on to is this idea that you need to be able to provide for your wife, and women, getting married is expensive, and if you don't have a lot of money in the bank, then you can't get married. It's kind of a similar fallacy, I think, to the overpopulation fallacy. It's the idea that a woman just costs you money. Well, no. I mean, God didn't say Adam needed more responsibility, so God gave him a wife. He said he needed help, so he gave him a wife. So actually, a woman is a net positive, not a negative, right? And I saw this. I got married very young. My wife was 19. I was 21 on our wedding day. She was almost 20, but I saw overnight. I saw that my dollars all of a sudden got stretched much, much further. I, as a stupid bachelor, was spending way too much money on feeding myself, for example, eating out or buying pre-made stuff. And I got married, and all of a sudden, I had this beautiful bride who wanted to help me and wanted to help me stretch my shopping budget a lot further, and she did. And we had a more beautiful life, more lovely, tasty, special meals on my little meager income at that time, and so it's just a small example, but I think a woman comes alongside a man to help, not to become a cost. If you think your college boy is distracted, will be distracted by a woman, by a wife, let me just tell you that he is so much more distracted right now without one. Okay, not being married, having this pent-up sexual energy, and this desire to be married, it is a massive distraction and frustration. And the outlet that God's given us for that is marriage, and He will be blessed immensely, and He will be blessed. I got through college because of my wife. I was struggling with college. I can blame it on a lot of different things. We were busy with kids and a lot of other stuff going on, but it was my wife who said, "Hey, I want you to get through this. I want to help you get through this. Let's do it. You can do it." A lot of it was just my wife was a inspiration for me. It wasn't just about me anymore. If it was just about me, it was like, I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. But it was about my wife. It was about providing for her, providing for our kids. And all of a sudden, I had this new kind of inspiration to go out and take dominion and be a man, because I had a wife and I had kids. So I think being married is an incredible motivation for men to stop screwing around and being wasteful with their time and energy and focus, and actually start doing something productive. The word husband means homebound. Just literally the actual word means homebound. And so marriage ties a man down. Untethered men are a problem in society. Men, you look at gang violence, and you look at the kind of trouble that men who are not tied down, who are not bound to a home, cause in the world. And it's a real blessing for society to have men who are bound to a home, bound to a marriage. So I really believe that a woman, that children spur men on to continue to grow and to develop professionally. And I think also, just from the help standpoint, coming back to that, a wife helps a man discern his gifts, his strengths, his weaknesses. So I've talked about this on this channel a bunch. My career path is 100% a function of the hundreds and thousands of hours of conversation that my wife and I have had over the years about what am I good at, what am I not good at. She knows me better than anybody in the world. She has skin in the game. It actually matters to her that I make a wise choice here. It doesn't matter to anybody else. When a guy goes, "What do you think I should do for a career?" Your parents want you to look good. They care about their reputation. They love you, and they'll be honest with you. Your friends just want to be your friends and want to tell you something that you want to hear. Your grandma thinks you're amazing and thinks you can do anything. There's a lot of counselors that may be well-intentioned but don't really have, aren't necessarily going to have great wisdom for you. But your wife does. Your wife is in it with you, and she wants you to have a great career because it matters to her. She's your partner. I think it brings me to another point. And that's that I think in the world's eyes, marriage is 1 + 1 = 2, right? So when you get married, it's one individual plus another individual, and they're together, two individuals, and that sounds right. Like, that's basic math. 1 + 1 = 2. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that that's not how the Scripture speaks about marriage, and it's really a recipe for disaster. If you have two individuals who want to have unique identities, unique career paths, unique goals, you're asking for a constant tug of war, a constant. I've just thought about the story of Samson where he ties the fox's tails together. It's like that kind of thing. You're asking for a very difficult life. If it's and this is why you shouldn't wait. The longer you wait, the longer you have to sort of develop your own trajectory and identity and direction and perspectives on the world and perspectives on child rearing and just perspectives on marriage. You become, I think the longer you wait to get married, it becomes harder and harder to find a partner. The biblical idea is 1 + 1 in marriage = 1. So you are one flesh. A husband and wife are joined together, and they become this new entity, this one flesh. And so, I've been married now for, pop quiz. I've been married for 18 years. I'm almost 40, and so basically most of my life, it's most of my wife's life, we've been married. And here in the next year or two, this will be the case for both of us, that we will have been married longer than we had not been married, and I think that's a good thing. I think my wife and I became a team, became a couple. Our identity became sort of fused very early on, and so we've been since we were kids. Basically, we've been heading in the same direction together, and I think it's a huge blessing. I think a lot of people are scared because of how common divorce is today. I think people are scared. They're scared of that. They want to retain their independence and their autonomy because, let's be honest, we're probably going to get divorced. And so you sort of go into this thing with this expectation that, I need to be prepared for when we divorce. And I need to be able to provide for myself if I'm a woman. And I just think you're asking for this, you're inviting this tension into your life that is not going to be a blessing. Another thought just coming back to getting married early. We kind of bounced all over, but talked about children and child rearing. This is according to the Anglicans, this is the first and primary purpose of marriage. And I think they're getting this from the mission that God gives Adam and Eve in the garden is be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. He's God's giving them a job to do. I've created you, and now you have a job, and that job is to be fruitful and multiply. So you need to procreate, and you need a helper for that. All the other animals have a helper for this, and you too, Adam, need a helper. Children require energy. Raising kids is hard work, especially young kids. Your sleep patterns get disrupted. They are taxing mentally and emotionally. And the older I get, the more, we just had our seventh, and she's an infant, and I told my wife, this is a young man's game. I mean, this is not for older guys. This is gets harder and harder as I get older and older. And I've got friends who waited and had kids much later, and I can see it. It's like they're haggard, man. I mean, they're beat up. It's rough. It's hard to do for both husband and wife, and it's a great blessing that God gave us this intense energy and peak of energy and sexual desire at the same time, because it's the time when we're designed to be fruitful and to raise kids. So child rearing is not for it's a young women's game, and so waiting is you're setting yourself up with you're starting out the whole child rearing thing on your back foot, because you're already behind. You're tired, and it's going to be harder for you. So I talked about husband being housebound. The central building block of society is the household. I talked about how being married, having kids, gives a man a purpose, and it ties him to a place. He's no longer a nomad, no longer a pirate, but he's actually tied to a home and a place. And this is how society, is able to develop roots and build. You as a young man have now a stake in the future. Young men don't typically think a whole lot about the future and about a legacy, but when you have kids, it just, that switch flips in your head where you're like, actually, that matters. I need to be thinking about setting, trying to bless my city and my community, so that it will be a blessing to my kids. And so the home, the household, is the central building block of society. And without it, you don't have society. And so we need more men early on, when they have more energy and passion to be thinking about the future. I'm mentioning Elon Musk again just because it occurs to me that he's got 5 kids. I think it's 5, and I don't look at Elon as some role model, but I think it's interesting that he's kind of obsessed with solving the big problems in the world, and he's got a bunch of kids. I don't know how early he was married, but he had to have been married pretty early to have that many kids. So I'll stop there. I hope that that's been helpful and compelling in some way. I didn't really structure that in a very particular way. I just kind of had a bunch of points I wanted to try to make there. The bottom line is that I think if you've got a son who wants to get married, and he is in college or in that age range, you shouldn't be holding him back. He is doing what God's designed him to do. He wants a good thing, and if God's given him that opportunity, you should encourage him to do that. A young man is supposed to leave his house and take a wife. One of the problems, I think, in a lot of our homes is and our society is we've tried to say, well, you don't need to be married. You can date and you can fool around with girls and you can kind of have these casual relationships, but just don't get married. And And what happens is you're offering young men some of the blessings of marriage without requiring them to be a man yet. So you're saying, go ahead and enjoy that. Stay a boy. Don't worry about developing skill or developing virtue. Just have fun with girls without any consequences. And I think that's the opposite of how we should be thinking about it. We should be thinking about it like, son, you've got this energy, you've got this desire. Let that be the engine that drives you to go out and become a man. Go out and become marriageable so you can go get a girl, so you can go get married. I want you to leave my house and become a man. That's a good thing. And when we see it happen, dads need to be on the sideline cheering. Your son has also left your house. I think there's a weird dynamic where a son leaves his home, but he's at college and dad's still paying for it, and so it's like, well, I'm still paying for it, so I get some kind of control over you. I don't know if this is the wisest way necessarily, but when I left the home to go to college, my dad gave me my college account and said, it's yours. Hope you spend it well. Good luck. Like it was basically go be a man. Go figure out how to be a man. And here's a pile of money that we saved up for you to go to college. I burned through that money pretty quickly. I burned through it in like my first 2 years. And then I got married after my second year. And so I spent the last couple of years of college having to figure out how to provide for myself and pay for my college and also pay for a family. My wife was finishing college as well. So that wasn't a burden. That wasn't an anchor that kept me from being successful in school or in my career. It was really the engine that drove me to grow up a lot faster than I would have without it. And so I'd like to encourage dads, turn these kids loose. You shouldn't be, when your son has left the house, you shouldn't be calling the shots anymore. He needs to be a man, and if he sees a woman that he wants to marry, he needs to marry her, and you need to be in his corner cheering for him, proud of him, excited about it. It's also a really unhealthy dynamic to start a marriage, start a relationship with a young man who still is taking orders from his dad. That's not a good dynamic. It's not a good look. And I think if you're a dad who's doing that, you're putting him in a very awkward position because he wants to honor you. He's supposed to honor you. But he also probably needs to disobey you on this. He kind of needs to defy you on this. And that's a tough tightrope you're asking him to walk. And I don't think that's right. And I don't think dads should put this burden on their kids, on their young men, on their sons. They need to send them out and say, hey man, go be a man. You've got this. I'm in your corner. Don't be an idiot. Don't be a fool. Come talk to me if you need help with anything. But you've got this, right? And not try to control them. And really this should start long before they've left the home. And this is a challenge for me. I've got 3 teenagers, and I'm getting that phase where I really want to govern their every step. And I'm realizing that I need to back off. One of the thoughts that's occurred to me over and over recently, and it was from, I think, my conversation with Rich Lusk about wisdom, is that our God is not a helicopter parent. And that's convicting to me at some level, right? Because you sort of have to be a helicopter parent at some level with your little ones. The pattern should be lots and lots of structure, lots and lots of discipline when they're young, and that slowly gets lifted as they get older. And at some point, you're needing them to you need them to develop wisdom, and you have limits as a human being in how much wisdom you can impart on your children. God's designed the world in such a way that most of us learn wisdom through hard knocks. We fall on our butts, we skin our knees, we embarrass ourselves stick our foots in our mouth, and those are the experiences that God has ordained to teach us wisdom. And so as a dad, if you're still controlling your son after he's left the home and is in college, you're like 4 or 5 years late on turning him loose and letting him start to make his own decisions and become a man. So stop doing that. if you're one of those dads, back off, let your son become a man. And if he wants to get married, he's onto something. That's a good thing. He should go ahead and do that. It'll be a blessing for him. So anyway, I'll stop. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day. Cheers.